Hello, YouTube viewer. Today we are looking at some games with a Simic Eldrazi list that I've been working on recently. I do think Mono Green is a good deck, but it just has some pretty big holes. Specifically, there are 3 or 4 cards you kind of have to play as payoffs, which suck lipstick, like Oblivion Sower, Conduit of Ruin, Smasher, Reshaper, World Breaker, and Warping Whale. I just always find myself siding them out. You play these cards because they say Eldrazi on the tin, but in the world of 7-point Highlander, they just don't cut it. I think the manifestation of this problem is Barrogoyf. Pretty much every deck plays Barrogoyf, and for 3 mana, Barrogoyf trumps half of your creatures without doing nothing. Mainstream 7-point media wants you to think that this card is just a good mid-range threat, but we the people know the pain of its tyranny. The fact is, we need more bang for our buck when it comes to payoff. Enter blue with a few key additions. We are actually going slightly down on creatures with Null Drifter and Drowner, but these two are immediately superior, in my mind at least, to their aforementioned cousins. Null Drifter kind of speaks for itself, and I actually really like Drowner in that it can tap down boards to buy you a couple more turns if you need it. As another bomb, we are running Portent of Calamity, and we're also going in on Ugin's Binding and Otawara for a little bit more interaction. And stock up, of course, for a bit of a bomb in of itself. Anyhow, I got 3 games here, so let's see how it goes. Game 1, we were up against Shops, which I think is an Eldrazi favoured matchup, in the mid-range at least, unless they rush you down early with something like a Workshop, or go super late and just have so many resources that you can't really compete anymore. Here, I kept a hand on the back of Rumble and a Soul Hand, and we get a bit burned by the Thought Knot. But I made a terrible mistake as I cast Rumble and accidentally passed through it, which isn't something I knew you could even do. So we essentially pay 2 mana for a spawn, which was rather embarrassing, but you learn MTGO every time you play it. Our opponent gets us with a Nettle Cyst on the Snake, and we go to game 2. Another amazing advantage of blue is we get to run Consign, which is obviously insane here. And I also put in the might for All Is Dust and Devourer of Destinies, which is kind of just a 7 mana 6/6 a lot of the time. Game 2, we do cop a Gemstone into a Saga, and I chose not to play out this might as we can't activate it, and I'd rather just hold up Consign. They don't play anything, indicating they're just going to make a construct, so we just run out the might to get their Saga, which obviously isn't the best value, but I don't think we can really let them search, and at least it's only 1 robot rather than 2. On their turn, they play a Regalia, which actually seems so sick in Shops. The fact that it gets a consistently powerful land straight away is so nice. On our turn, I could have held up Consign here, but I just want to get onto the board, so I play Myca Spawn without the kicker, just to get a Saga going. Our opponent plays the Shops Tsunami of cardboard, and we draw a Drowner. And this is one of the times that it looks really nice. It does kind of lock down the Night Scythe a little bit and ramps us as well. We do have to burn the spawns to counter this K command, which I did replicate just in case of mental misstep. We get smacked in the air, and especially with the painful draw robot thing, we are getting dangerously low. Here, I could have cast Ulamog, but I wanted to clear their board to prevent Night Scythe from crewing, and then just follow up with the Ulamog on some more valuable targets. And I made a pretty huge error here in not swinging with the Drowner. I was thinking I just wanted some fat blockers to take out their board when I took the Emrakul turn, but if I had have just dealt the 6 here, Emrakul would have been lethal on my next turn, which would have been way better. Anyhow, on their turn, our opponent draws Confluence, so we do get to one-sided sweep of them. However, thinking back on this now, I should have swung in with their creatures and then blinked my Drowner to get Scions, as it is an enters trigger rather than a cast. On their turn, they play a massive Clown Car, and we basically just have to pray behind Repurposer that they don't draw any interaction, and we can survive on 1 health. Luckily, they didn't play anything. However, after the game, my opponent did message that they drew the Fleshraker for turn, so that they could have crewed the Clown Car, so technically we should have been dead. So pretty big misplays on both sides of the table there, but anyway, we get lucky and we get to claim the victory. Game 3 I kept just because we have such good interaction, and I decided to consign the patchwork just to keep the pressure off a little bit. We get to play a Saga into a Kiora, which, as we are going to see, is so dirty. Our opponent plays a 7/7, but we rip Ulamog and get to double tap Manifold in one turn with Kiora for a very, very cheesy win. Match 2, we're on the draw against Jund, which is a heavily Eldrazi favoured matchup, but still very losable. Unfortunately, our Sol Ring gets countered, but our opponent doesn't really have a follow-up. We just build for K-Command, and our opponent gets to iterate. Here, I decided to command on our end step when our opponent lacked the double blue, as it did seem like they were representing Counterspell earlier. However, we get blown out by a Force Spike, which, fair enough. We then showdown with our Nemesis. However, we do have Abstergo Entertainment on the battlefield to buy us a little bit of time and get back our Sol Ring. Here we play Sire, and in a positive turn of events, get to fade the attack from the Barragoyf. We get in there, and our opponent double blocks with a Dismember. However, we do have the Otawara to bounce the Goyf and go to game 2. Just watching this back here, I think our opponent on their turn could have swung in with their Barragoyf and dismembered on their turn, which would have stopped us being able to Otawara and would have grown their Barragoyf to a 2/3, which I think would have got them the trade, but I could be missing something there. In sideboard, I brought in the classic Choke Carpet for It That Heralds the End and Portent of Calamity. The Herald is just a little bit dorky in my experience, and while Calamity is very fun, in this matchup we're just looking for bombs with cast triggers. Our opponent leads on Tamio, and I dismembered here just because she can really get away from Eldrazi quickly if you flip her on turn 2 or 3. On our turn, I feel like this was pretty obviously a counterspell, but we can't not play the Monolith. And then on their turn, our opponent casts an Iteration. We managed to get a land, but our stock up gets Thoughtseized, which we were kind of relying on, and our opponent plays maybe the best card in the matchup, Murktide Regent. We just have to play Ultima, and our opponent sanctuaries back the counterspell, which once again we kind of have to play into with the Drowner, and with a Psychic Frog and a Kolaghan's Command, we get taken to game 3. On the play here, I kept this hand as I liked that it was pretty resilient to discard and counterspells with the Cavern of Souls, and unfortunately for our opponent, their Inquisition completely whiffs, which I think is maybe correct to side out, especially on the draw. They play a Ledger Shredder, but we play a Territory Color, which in a way is kind of emblematic of the matchup, as it's just way too big and ends the game on its own. The final matchup I think was a very good demonstrator of the weakness of this Simic list, and that is against aggro. The fact that you don't have as many dorky dudes to just get in the front of creatures can really hurt you against efficient tempo. Also, the brew I played against was insanely sweet. I led on Tomb here just in case we drew an untapped green for Mycospawn, and chose to play out the path first, just because it ramps you so incredibly well. Unfortunately, we eat the Force of Will, and come face to face with Big B. Here I should have just played the Calamity for 3 to draw some cards. However, I am embarrassed to say I totally thought I had a Monolith rather than a Mana Vault, and was planning on untapping it end of turn. We get rinsed by more threats, and we go to game 2. Here I brought in Elephant Grass for the Relic, as you will see, their brew is all about taking cards out of their graveyard. This was another shaky keep, but Once Upon a Time just does something to my brain where as soon as I see it, I think the hand is a keeper. We get stuck on lands, and our opponent plays a Feral Youth, which is something I've actually seen a little bit of recently in Jund and Grixis lists. It seems like one of those cards that reads pretty poorly, but tends to play out fairly well. We try to stabilize behind this repurposer, and our opponent forgets about Cavern of Souls, so we do get a little bit of a foot back in the door. We block, and they play a Kishla Skimmer, so insane value for when they take cards out of the bin. Here, I just played Fleshraker and held up for K-Command, and it is possible that in their combat I should have exiled the Feral Youth rather than the Kishla Skimmer. However, at this point they didn't have any enablers, so I thought maybe I could stonewall the Feral Youth with the Fleshraker for a while. However, we get done super dirty by this Keen-Eyed Curator, which lets the Feral Youth beam us at the end of the turn, and on the following turn they turn it into a 7/7 Trampler, which takes home the match. So recapping all of this, I feel like Simic honestly might be edging out Mono Green at least a little bit for me. Having the ability to play some more efficient cards with a little bit more payoff and more interaction is so nice, and I've been really enjoying it. That said, I do really think the aggro matchup is considerably worse, so I need to do some thinking about that. Maybe I should be putting back in the Matter Reshaper or something like that. Anyhow, if there is some tech or a mistake I'm missing, please let me know. See ya.